So as Sarah nicely introduced, I have a background in exploration geology, but I'm a consultant working with the wonderful Satarla team. But like I say, here today, I'm representing a new company I've just founded with my good friend Sean Jefferson, um, which is around many of these ideas about kind of changing how we go about doing early stage exploration. So, Worth Discovery is the name of our company, and it was actually incubated and supported by Satala. So, you'll see lots of similar threads throughout. But what am I here today to do? So, nicely bookending the conference, which is always a privilege to do. It means that I have the ability to draw on all of the wonderful talks. I think I've seen most of them. There's a few I've managed to miss, but I'll definitely try and catch up with them. And behind me, you can see a few post-it notes that I've been sticking to the wall. If anyone's done anything with Satali, you know we love a sticky note. I'm going to try and get through some of these by adding bits of some of the insights throughout my talk as we go through and see how we get on. So what do I actually want to cover? So going back to that concept of mineral exploration, one of the things that we're consistently told and we're heard is that, we need a lot more minerals to secure this future we're all trying to aspire towards. And big part of that is mineral exploration. But one of the things that I often feel uncomfortable about is many of the narratives and reasons why we justify why we go out and what we're trying to do often don't make sense to me. And that's someone who works in the sector. And anyone who is a geologist or has done anything in mineral exploration will understand how, high risk, uncertain the world of looking for mineral deposits are. But when the narrative and reason for why we're doing that is also uncertain, I kind of want to challenge, well, where does that leave us? So with every business and startup, you need a number of metrics and numbers or statistics. Freud has kind of touched on this, how quite often by just having a number or a statement often doesn't capture the full nuance of this. So one of the things I want to delve into today is some of those narratives and mantras that we quite consistently hear. If anyone has been to a conference or an event, you'll know what I mean by certain phrases that we use to justify what we do. Often they come from a place of a good idea, but then over time you end up saying them and repeating them so often they don't actually make sense anymore. So I welcome anyone, if they have their favorites, to put them in the chat that they hear at conference and events. If anyone has recently opened the AI vomit that is LinkedIn, you will have seen many of these repeated constantly throughout. And so I just want to dive into a few of them now. So one of the first ones that I've consistently gone to, if anyone's heard me talk about this, you'll know this is one of my big bugbears, is that in exploration, we often justify how important it is to find things because it is really hard to find them. And we often hear this statistic of 1 in 1,000 projects are successful. So what they kind of one project feeds through to a mine. And yes, some of the statistics kind of show that this may be something like it. There are various academic studies on it. There's a great talk from Francis McDonald at Kenneland a few years ago that kind of showed that this might be similar. But when you boil projects down to statistics as 1 in 1,000, you're assuming that each of those are equal. They're not. They have different communities, different risks, different commodities, very, very different things. But one of the more damaging parts for me is that it communicates to the wider industry or wider society that this is a risk. It's almost like a gamble. You could be one of those 1 in 1,000, whereas in essence, it should be a process of limiting the risk of those things. And actually, I'd rather those odds to be much, much better rather than being that lucky 1 in 1,000, if that kind of makes sense. And when we see actual success of different projects globally, timelines are getting longer, discoveries are getting harder to kind of find. And so we are at a kind of a tipping point where we need to really do something to kind of challenge this. So please push back if you disagree with that kind of sentiment. The next one, which is maybe even more provocative, is the criticality agenda. We've heard from various different people throughout this week the importance of criticality, Gavin Mudd and various other people. The need to classify minerals as critical is a crucial part for geopolitics, for supply chains. But when it comes back to those geologists on why you're justifying what you're doing from day one, so we heard from students at Oxford, there's one, about why they do what they do, why they're interested in this sector, I often get slightly concerned when you justify the reason why you're doing things around a narrative that is around, we're looking for critical minerals for the energy transition. Now, that is absolutely valid, and it's something that I am personally extremely passionate about. But if that's how you are justifying what you're doing when you're going out to these often rural communities, different parts of the world, and you say, "Oh, can I come and have a look in your back garden because these things are critical, they're really needed." Often the narrative of that doesn't match the reality of those people. And so we heard about from Izzy, from Saatchi, it's been mentioned about the various narratives and how that's really important to kind of understand the perspectives of different people in different places. Energy transition minerals is also quite unrealistic when it comes to the spend. When you just look at the raw statistics of spend within exploration budgets, this year I think it was around 50%. In previous years it's around that. Almost half of all exploration drilling is pumped into gold. I'm not bashing gold. I'm just saying, when you're saying you are a company out for the energy transition, gold arguably has nothing to do with that. And so therefore, I think the narrative surrounding a lot of the major companies and governments is kind of captured the attention of the last few years. And what we're seeing, especially at various conferences, is that narrative is now changing around critical minerals, not for the energy transition, but for security. So all of a sudden, if you've justified why you're going into geosciences and exploration around the need for this energy transition minerals, and you end up starting exploring for minerals that are actually going to underpin security, so defense minerals. So those minerals are going to go into rockets, missiles, things like that. I think we need to be very cautious of that narrative and actually go back to thinking about why is it you're doing what you're doing and what interests you from day one, if that kind of makes sense. So the next big one that I want to touch on, the narrative or the paradox, is AI in exploration or in mining. And it's this promised golden goose that's hoping to be laid. And I'll go back to Sean Barker, who spoke on day one. His words, not mine. A lot of the companies are snake oil. A lot of them are promising a future and optimization that is yet to really be realized. And one of the problems I have that we see throughout a lot of the work that we do is the promise of AI is actually being misunderstood. And so when you look at all these, there's a great work by the Clean Tech Group looking at just the variety of different AI startups in the world. Some of these are doing really exciting, interesting work that could be very impactful. But in essence, they're optimizing a process. So a lot of these companies will maybe get to the future of what you're doing more efficiently, quicker, but they're not really tackling the underlying systemic problems and challenges we have within the sector. So yes, you might get to that target or that discovery quicker with less money, but then what? And at the moment, I'm seeing no one really trying to tackle a bigger question of the then what. And going back to how is this going to impact both students, different institutions around the country. We've heard from, like I said, the Oxford kind of group, and we've got great institutions that are really trying to tackle this. So I know from listening to the work that Sarah's done at Imperial, this has been talked about. Other good institutions like Cambon School of Mines and other places across the country, who are trying to see how does this impact students day to day. And there was a great study by MIT last year that was put out where they tested over 3 months how students doing research papers, they were given students that had to think about the subject with their brain. So it was brain and then a large language model, so with ChatGPT. And then other ones who had ChatGPT to help initially to develop the idea, and then they had to use their brain to reconcile what they were doing. And what they found overwhelmingly was that brain first and then large language model still provided much better outcomes, much better ability to kind of remember what they've done and formulate those arguments and other things. So again, that's something that we need to come to. And then this graph on this figure on the right from the Financial Times really stood out to me a few months ago when it kind of came out. And what it shows, and I think this is from various different speakers, there's a thread throughout, also from Aileen, a previous talk, is that for the first time, we're starting to see people who have high social and kind of empathy starting to perform better in the workplace. And I think this goes back to how traditionally we have been rewarded around those metrics, those senior people. I've definitely heard it mentioned a few times throughout this week. Technical skills, technical specialisms, traditionally were how you rose up the ladder of organizations much quicker. Whereas actually, Freud just again touched on this in the beginning of today, is that maybe the attributes of those leaders need to be more around the ability to manage uncertainty, the ability to kind of juggle those different backgrounds. And that's certainly something we're seeing today. And with the advent of AI, a lot of those real technical specialisms are kind of now being sucked up into that kind of way of doing it. So I think it's this full kind of change of how we move dynamics in different teams internally. And the last point on that, also going back to that diversity of things, is that in exploration and mineral exploration, there's again narratives around how we discovered things. The best discoveries were made X, Y, and Z. And the stories around them often revolve around the team of people who are involved in it. So although there may have been an interesting geological idea, a new technology that's been used, it's often what has unlocked or enabled that kind of discovery and development of that project to be done. It's around the people. And we heard about the great work that's been done from Thor Exploration in Nigeria about how that is, again, it's the people base. That's how they've got those projects to be developed so quickly. So although a lot of the background in exploration and geology is very technical, I think the real power of AI is how do we use that to underpin those more softer skills of the workforce of the future and the next day. So coming back to kind of the opportunity that we're trying to do at Worth Discovery. So again, we too quite often focus on the optimization of the below ground kind of stuff. How do we find where those mineral deposits are quicker and more efficiently, which is something I'm not discounting. It's something that is at the central part of what we're trying to do at Worth Discovery. But it's how do we then look at the variety of things around it, all of those other aspects that are super complex, that are very difficult to kind of do. And Mukesh's talk basically set this up perfectly, and that's exactly what we're trying to do from those earliest points of a project, is how do we kind of integrate those things and be able to map this out as a system. So joining those above ground risks with the below ground aspects. And so at the moment, I think there's a great statistic that was that almost half of all projects that are at pre-feasibility or feasibility are currently stalled. And a third of them are due to financial problems, but 2/3 of them are related to environmental and social and governance kind of problems. So these are kind of aspects that, although we can do the best geology on possible, if we don't start tackling these things from day one, it's never going to really work for the future. So how do we start managing those complex interconnected risks from day one? How do we do that? Well, at the moment, we're using this kind of AI to help us kind of find those insights from a variety of different technical documents and map them out as a system. And the power of using systems to understand complexity is that humans, we're good at juggling about 2 or 3 dimensions of things. But when you start getting really, really complicated, it gets very hard. And one of the things you hear from a lot of exploration geologists on the ground is that, I've already got this covered, which they might do in their head. But then how do they then communicate that with stakeholders, management, other team members, and other places? And it really brought home to the talk we heard about from Rini about value washing. How do we kind of embed different perspectives? And because this is a system, you can configure it to basically be viewed from various different perspectives. And you can see how through someone else's eyes, your worldview may be very different. And hopefully that allows you to see some of these critical paths, how these projects are interconnected and really, really complicated. That's kind of it at the moment. But the final kind of point I want to share is that the world that I'm seeing is becoming increasingly complex and interconnected. And only by taking a step back and finding the nuance is where the real next steps in innovation and resource development is going to come from. It's very easy to treat the world as black or white, whereas actually there's a lot of grey, and the grey part is where the really exciting stuff happens. So I haven't got through all my post notes, hopefully I've got through a few of them. But yeah, thank you very much, and look forward to the discussion after this.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Matt. Everyone, please put your hands together for the fantastic Matt Grimshaw. Brilliant. As Matt is there trying to work out which post-it notes he did or didn't look at. Now you can bring some of them in, Matt. Go on. Um, Matt, one question is right at the forefront of my mind. So you are an incredibly good exploration geologist. What, and I'm going to say this provocatively, what gives you the right to be able to talk about stuff going on above the surface of the earth?
Well, I think it goes back to that thing I said before about geology as a science is actually has always been generalist. It's always been a generalist kind of subject. Even you go back to Lyle and the start of the rocks, they were looking at all these different, they were integrating, biology, diversity of thought, going back to what Anthony talked about. What's another one on the list? So therefore, I think as exploration geologists, we do have a skill of being able to integrate and connect these different specialisms and things. And I really want to kind of reiterate that at no point am I pretending to be the world expert at any of these points. I see the role of a good exploration geologist as that person who can be that almost like conductor to integrate and pull together those deep specialists and parts. And only by doing that, that's where you unlock the real true value of these kind of projects going forwards. Is that's really the role you need to play. And I think it goes back to that point of we keep being told, pick a subject, specialize, become the world expert. That's how you're going to be successful. And I just think the world is changing so quickly that that's just no longer going to work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, I mean, to that, Matt, the reason why I guess I asked that question in such a pointed way is I think people quite often like to put one another in boxes. So they go, okay, I
Yeah,
know where you fit. You're a geologist, you're the financial person, you're a whatever. And then when someone starts going on, actually, I'm really excited by many different areas and bringing them together, that can be almost quite threatening to someone who feels, no, this
yeah,
is
yeah.
my specialism. And just because we've got our fabulous panel back here now, looking at everyone, can you give me a wave if at some point in time in your life you have studied something like geology? Okay, so Freudis, for example, from your perspective, so having, you've got a degree that is in geology, but your recent jobs, for example, I guess you've been quite a long way away from those rocks. Can you just give us a bit of a insight in terms of that, kind of that progression or that expansion with regards to that initial starting point?
Yeah, and I think I got a degree in geography and geology, and I think that says it all, where geography is place, space, you know, and it brings together both the sort of, I guess, the humanities and the sciences side. So I think I've always been interested in that breadth and how things link together. And weirdly, I've kind of got further away from the rocks, but actually being in the extractive space, it is all about geography. And like I say, geography is this sort of, intersection of science and humanities. And, I've got friends I was at uni with, and they're like, oh man, your jobs are just so geography. And it really is about, the sort of natural world and how that meets the sort of human world and all of the dynamics that come into it. So as I've gotten on into my career, the interesting thing I would also say to people is the jobs that I do today or I'm doing today, some of them didn't exist when I graduated. And I think the really important bit, just like you're saying, Matt, on skills that people have is that curiosity to keep learning and growing and thinking about different things within both within their specialism, but how their specialism actually can interact with other areas. So, you know, being an exploration and looking at the rocks, the first thing you have to do is work with the local communities if they're around. So immediately you're sort of there to do one thing, but actually part of that activity means you need to do all sorts of other things as well. So I'd say if unless you're, well, actually it makes sense in everybody's area, even if you're a sort of hardcore resource geo, just wanting all your data, how do you get those resources to market, which brings in all sorts of geopolitical, how do you do the mine plan, all of those things. So I'd say if you think you're being too specialized and or sorry, if you think you're too far away from your degree, I wouldn't worry. I would say that gave you a grounding to and a platform to really see how expansive the world is and the different directions that, earth sciences can take you and how foundational they are to modern society.
There we go. So if you're looking for what to study, everybody, have a think about earth sciences, because then you can do anything with your life. Matt, just coming back to yourself, just to finish off on your presentation. So you and Sean, you founded Worth. Where next? What's happening with it?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do is, I said this is like the problem we're trying to deal with is an upstream problem. So this is where we're trying to basically prove to people they should think about things much more holistically from day one, integrate these aspects to make more successful discovery. So it's something you're trying to get people to do before it's happened. It's almost like selling a diet versus a weight loss pill. We're trying to sell the diet, which is always a bit harder. So at the moment, we're trying to partner with various organizations who are more forward thinking to do this. But ultimately, the idea would be to kind of go out and, at the end of the day, do it ourselves in a more sustainable, more responsible way. So I think, yeah, going back to those narratives, it's just keep it simple. We want to do things in the most responsible way because we see that as security. That was Mark Fellow's talk on decarbonisation was just that before it was a nice thing to do, good for the planet, but now it's actually crucial for security that needs to be done. And so it goes back to that thing of how do we improve the way that we actually develop these projects from day one. So although as an exploration geologist, another talk from Richard Shoddy, he said that the discovery is actually the easy bit, even though that hurts my exploration geologist brain. It's the development that's really hard to do. And I think you look at the statistics and there's 41% of all discoveries have been developed since 1950. So those discoveries were made by 1950, only 41% have been developed. The best place to develop mines at the moment is Africa. They're 2 to 3 times more likely to develop a mine there. But that maybe for certain other reasons that can be unpicked. But yeah, it's how do you think about that longer term part from day one? Because it's very easy for you to be like, I just look at the rocks, find them, and then it's someone else's problem. That just does not cut it anymore. And I think it's businesses and companies are starting to realize that. So that's where we're trying to disrupt and trying to play an active part in.
Brilliant. Well, with that, Matt, good luck with everything and massive thank you for coming and joining us here today. Round of applause for Matt Grimshaw, everyone. Brilliant.